Now we want to find the range of this question. G of x is 1 over x plus 1. So to find the range of this function, we need to find the inverse of the function first. Alright, then we find the domain of the inverse. So to find the inverse of this function, we are given to first of all replace f of x with y. Anyway, this f of x here is just the notation or the name we call the function. Like as in this case and this case, we called it f of x. So now here we're having g of x. So we want to replace g of x with y. Right? So in place of g of x, we just put y. And then we equate it to the right hand side, which is 1 over x plus 1. So it's just a matter of notation. So the next thing is to interchange x and y. So in place of y, we are going to put x. And then in place of x, we are going to put y. That is just by interchanging. Okay. So the next thing that we want to do is to solve this equation for y. So we want to make y to stand alone on one side of the equation. So since here is just a fraction, and then the y is in the denominator, we want to take the reciprocal of both sides. Right? So just to put things up. So you take the reciprocal of this, you're going to have 1 over that. It's going to be 1 over x. And then you take the reciprocal of this one. That will just bring the denominator to the top. That is y plus 1. And then the denominator, we're going to have just this one, alright? I know dividing something by 1, the result is just that thing. So we're just going to have y plus 1 at the top. So this is just y plus 1. Alright, good. And then we can subtract 1 from both sides, and that will give us y on one side of the equation. So by subtracting 1 from both sides, we're going to have that y is 1 over x minus 1. Alright, good. And then this new y, according to the fourth point, that this new y is called the f inverse. But since we are dealing with g, we're going to call it g inverse. That is just the inverse of this function. That is the new y. Alright, so we got that g inverse of x to be 1 over x minus 1. Now notice, we're having 1 over x minus 1, alright? So let me just put it down. 1 over x minus 1. So this one I can write it as x over x. You know, if you have a fraction, the numerator and denominator are the same, the result of the fraction is just 1. So that one there, I just replaced it with x over x. It's the same thing, alright? Given that x is not equal to 0. Alright, good. And then by our knowledge of subtraction of fractions, since the denominators are the same, we get a common denominator, and then we deal with the numerator. So this is just 1 minus x. So I can replace this with its equivalent, which is 1 minus x divided by x. Alright, great. And now we want to find the domain of this inverse in order to find the range of the given function. So the domain of the inverse of this function g of x, which this is the inverse, g inverse, is going to be the set of all real numbers that will make that function to be defined. That is the domain of this function. Okay, great. So when we talk about rational functions, we do not want the denominator to be 0. That is, function whose numerator and denominator are polynomial terms. So if the denominator of this function is 0, then that function is going to be undefined. So for the function to be defined, we do not want the denominator to be 0, right? Great. Now, this denominator, which is just x, is going to be 0 if x is 0. That is, if x is equal to 0, then the denominator is going to be 0, right? So we do not want x to be 0. So we want every other real numbers except 0. So this is how we're going to put down the domain of G inverse. We say that the domain of G inverse of x is going to be a set containing all real numbers x, right, such that x is not equal to 0. So we want to get every other real number except 0. That forms the domain of the G inverse. Okay, great. And then the domain of the inverse of a function tells us about the range of that function. So this is the same thing as saying the range of g of x. So the range of this function is going to be the set of all real numbers except 0. That tells us that we can output every other number. That is, for every given input, we can get every other result, but we can't get 0 as a result. That is what it means to be the range of a function. Alright, great. Okay, thanks for watching and please subscribe to my channel.